What's happening in the canine industry? For all the latest news, views, and expert opinions, stay right here for the Canine Paradigm. You'll hear from industry leaders, experts, doyens of the industry, learned colleagues, movers and shakers, and the odd randy guest. Get the latest insights and expert advice from both here and abroad from the people in the know. Now, here are your hosts, Glenn Cook and Pat Stewart. And I'm Lofty Fulton, and I'm out of here.
Linda?
Yes.
We have to do a new ad.
We do.
It's a solemn time. Our long-time sponsor of the show, George Kittredge,
Yes.
very, very sadly passed away. And we formerly used to advertise for him his Rowdy Hound boxes.
We did.
So we don't actually know what's happened with Rowdy Hound boxes. Do you know anything about that?
I looked at the website. It said that they're recalibrating since their founder and boss has passed. But nonetheless, I think that you and I want to honour the memory of George Kittredge anyway. He was a friend to both of us, a hell of a good guy, and he supported us almost immediately. He was on board through and through, and I just don't want any of us to forget George. He was a terrific human being.
So we intend to continue to advertise Rowdy Hound, even though we don't know what's going on with them.
Yep.
In the hopes that they keep going, and that can be a bit of George's legacy that we're able to continue to promote.
I hope so.
In checking it out, we had a look to see, because we're not real good with the sponsorship. So we had a look to see who's actually paying for sponsorship. And we have a list of people to tell you that we support. And the first is our sugar mama, Barbara de Groot.
She's been with us from the start as well. Barbara's been an absolute staple in our...
She's a gem.
She is a gem.
She has a business.
She does. From the Heart Dog Training.
From the Heart Dog Training.
Yeah.
You can check it out. But she supports us as much and more than anybody ever has. So we appreciate you very much, Barbara. Another person who's supported us from the start.
The Einzelwiener.
Einzelwiener.
The Bullfed.
The Bullfed.
Yep.
It's where I get all my stuff.
Yeah.
It is, truly. It's where I get all my dog gear. If I need something, Jason's my first point of call. I don't use his shit website. He has a website. It's dog shit. I just message him directly. You guys probably should use his shit website, but I don't.
Yeah, because you don't want to message him directly and get his grumpy ire of the day.
Yeah, but do it. Get all your dog stuff from Jason. He's got everything you need. He's got all the shit that you need to train a dog for realty.
Everybody who comes to seminars and looks at meals and asks me meals questions, ask Jason.
Yeah.
Jason can point you in the right direction for getting the meal that's best suited for you.
I really like his leashes. I'm a big fan of his leash pack. That's why I sort of convinced him to do it. But anyway, get your stuff from Einzelwiener.
Yep.
Do you know who has a fantastic website and ships internationally?
My wife?
Your wife,
Yeah.
Canine.
I couldn't imagine her not having a good website, how much of a perfectionist she is.
Well, the products are amazing. My dog merely being alive is a walking testimonial to that. My dog, who I've retired numerous times and has come out of retirement when I've managed to get his body back to healthy, and a big part of that is related to Canine. So check it out, everybody.
I could say so many nice and biased things about Canine and my wife, but what I will say is ignore me. Just look at the testimonials. The testimonials speak for themselves. That's where the field trials are working. What makes Narelle's day, and mine as well, is when people are emailing in and sending messages of, well, primarily people have had no hope in the past because just everything that they were trying wasn't working, and now it is. And that is the testament that something is actually really working. And the other thing, which I will add, one of the things that Narelle's told me in the past is dogs are incapable of understanding the placebo effect.
Oh, that's a good point.
So you can fake it on a human, but you can't fake it on a dog.
I never thought about that before. That's actually a really good point.
Well, my wife's actually a very smart person.
There you go.
So she's told me that humans are subject to the placebo effect where dogs are not. So it either works or it doesn't on dogs.
There you go. That makes total sense.
Yep.
All right. Oh, there's one other person who puts a fair amount of work into this show.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah. Funny about that.
And I have a digital product that you can buy. If you go to my website, seriousdogbusiness.com, right now I've got 2 courses available to you. The Overview, which is a small course where you could learn how I teach.
Yep.
But the other one is the Wave Tops, which is a bigger course. It's everything I know about dog training. Well, it's not everything. It's a lot of what I know about dog training.
Yeah,
Check it
terrific.
out.
Yeah.
$500 dues. That's all it's going to cost you.
I recommend it when people are saying, what do I do? How do I get in the industry? I recommend them to your course.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
sir. All right, on with the show. Welcome back to the Canine Paradigm. I'm your host, Pat Stewart. I'm joined in studio today by my co-host, Glenn Cook.
COVID free.
Turned out you had the vid.
I had the spicy flu.
Yeah, and I sat here the whole time with you and I'm vidless.
Yeah, so what happened, which I was telling you about before, I tested negative on the day that you came around because I thought, I don't feel well, I feel pretty shit, but not as bad as I have in comparison to other versions that I've had before. But I tested negative. And then suddenly you'd gone home and I started getting messages from people saying, oh, we got COVID when we were all at Michael Ellis's seminar in Sunshine
So it was a
Coast.
super spreader event.
It was a super spreader event. So, but as I said, in comparison to other ones I had, it was a breeze.
Yeah.
Narelle's got it currently and she's just flying through the day.
Yeah.
She gets up at 5:30 in the morning and all she does is just feels like she's a little bit heady, but she's like amazing with it.
Yeah, sweet.
Anyway, COVID's so fucking yesterday.
It's just a cold now that you got to get on with your lives.
It is. Just get over it.
Hey, we're going to hook straight in.
Yes.
We're going to work through some stuff. I think this is a fun one. From Brad Black. Is there a piece of training advice or a tip that you thought was terrible for a while and then discovered a use for?
Yeah, well, I was like that with clickers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mate, I would have died on the hill that clickers were a fucking joke and that people who used them
For
were
sissies.
Absolutely. We've talked about it. I know that we've talked about it. I've talked about it to people in conferences and seminars when I've done them before. I would have died on that hill. I would have said to people, do not use them. They are stupid. You are stupid if you're using them. It's a gimmick. It's fraudulent. Mm-hmm. But that was just complete and utter ignorance on my behalf. Mm-hmm. I was defending an old law in training that you don't use gimmicky things or toys or stupid things like that. It was just uneducated. Mm-hmm. And as I said, my ego was just getting out of check. But now I see how essential markers are. Mm. But even if I look back, as I've reflected on past comments, as I've looked back, we were using cues and markers in training all along.
Yeah.
We just weren't acknowledging them in the same way.
It's kind of impossible not to.
You know, Boyd's probably listening to this, like kicking his dashboard saying, oh, we did so, but it wasn't reflected as part of the typical type of training. We were using markers as far as more tactile, I guess, than verbal. We were doing more tactile things. But even when you listen to Mike Ellis talking about the use of cues and markers and how anything that is sensory activated is a cue or a marker. So there are a lot of times where you use them and you have a lot of unintentional cues and markers that you use, such as when you're about to do something, you bob your head or grimace your face or something like that, and it becomes an unintentional cue or marker for your dog's behavior. So we do them without intentionally thinking about it sometimes. Getting back to my point that I was making before, it was just a limitation in understanding that prevented me from doing something which I really wish that I had more forethought on. But we were very limited in the information that was coming out, and it wasn't widely and publicly thought of as an essential tool in training. But now I look at it and I think, wow, what an incredible accessory to training.
How do you use a clicker these days?
Pretty much the same way that we used it when we're learning the NAPOPO system. I think that it is essential to make sure that the dog understands that when it's marked to come back for reinforcement straight away. So I like the way that Bart taught it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what you've got a dog, it knows the clicker, it's loaded for terminal release from behavior, come back to you, take food.
Yep.
What makes you go, in this session, I'm going to use a clicker versus use your verbal markers or whatever else?
To be honest, I'm using verbal markers over clickers more these days, just purely for laziness of going to get the clicker. So for me, I just kind of look at it like having to rummage around looking for clickers all the time. I think clickers are preferable on the basis that they're a consistent form of marking all the time. Whereas, as we've proven with verbal before, you can have some variance there. I think that could be argued on skilled and competent trainers. Even though I've just defended the point of clickers and talked them up about how amazing they are, I'm still using my verbal markers over mechanical markers.
Yeah. For me, I load a clicker very early, as soon as I can interact with a dog, right? So if I get a puppy or whatever, straight away I'm loading the clicker.
Yep.
But as life sort of carries on, the really only time I use a clicker is mostly in shaping.
Yep.
If I'm a reference point to the behavior, then I tend not to use a clicker. So by that I mean, like if I'm teaching a heel or a front or a middle or
where it's a bit more interactive with you.
Yeah, like where conditions of the behavior involve me, right? Because those things happen around you. Then I tend to use a verbal marker for that because I feel like the clicker doesn't give me as much as there isn't a huge gain to having it when I'm that close to the dog and I'm manipulating those kind of behaviors. But when I'm shaping or when the dog is kind of further away from me and I'm sort of, I guess, shaping, but, not necessarily totally free shaping, but molding and all the variants kind of that sort of stuff where I'm not luring the dog in the moment, right? Like where I'm sort of letting the dog do stuff and paying it when it does. That's when I tend to use a clicker. And I think that one of the reasons I still really love the clicker is it takes a lot of you out of the equation.
Yeah. It's very distinctive too to everything else that's going on, like that pitched.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just literally before I came out here, I'm editing this video. It's for the new course and stuff, and it's me shaping this dog. I used to film all my training and stuff, and I still film a lot of it, but I've never filmed myself in a long while, right? Because I'm showing... I'm filming this dog shaping. I've got 5 different cameras set up so you can see everything that's happening because he has total freedom throughout my whole shop. He can move around, do whatever. Because I intentionally didn't set myself up perfectly for success because not everybody's going to have the capacity to do that, right? So I didn't barricade off where all the equipment wall is. So if the dog heads towards that, I've got to deal with that. And I show how to manage all of that. But I was watching myself, and so I use the clicker at this time. But I was watching myself shaping for the first time. Normally when I'm watching back, I'm watching the dog and stuff like that. But because I'm critiquing myself via voiceover in this video, I noticed when you're doing that kind of shaping, like how easy it is to accidentally provide inference to the dog, right? Like, and I think that the more steps you can put between yourself and the dog being able to read what you're inferring increases the chances of the shaping being successful. And I explain that, these days I have fairly different feelings about shaping. I tend to I still do a decent amount of shaping, but it's more for the brain of the dog rather than the body, right? So I don't necessarily care about the outcomes that I'm teaching when I'm teaching shaping these days. I really am more about I'm teaching the dog to use its brain, solve a problem, and I tend to set kind of peculiar criteria. Like in the video, the thing I'm teaching him to do is to get onto a kennel. It had to be something, right? And I wanted it to be in the middle of the room, and going around something is too easy. So I wanted something a bit more challenging, and I wanted to confuse the dog a little bit so that I could show how to work through that. I wanted it to be difficult. So it's a kennel that the dog has been in a lot. So he kept thinking that I wanted him to go into it. So it was the challenge of getting onto it, all that kind of stuff. But I just sort of really noticed looking at myself again, which I haven't done in that level of detail in a really long time, of how important the clicker and therefore your body position and that minimizing the amount of inference you give to the dog. So for me, I agree with you totally. I still love the clicker. There's a video series of me saying clickers are stupid, don't use them. Mostly because of the same rhetoric I kind of told everybody, that you have your voice, you don't always have your clicker and all that, and all those sorts of things, which I still agree with. But I think that there is a time and place for the clicker. And I think that the level of accuracy that it provides is one of the bigger things as well.
It's a little bit more clinical, as you've just deduced with what you were talking about, instead of it, like that interactive relationship between you and a verbal. Sometimes you can emphasize a little bit more verbally than you can with a clicker. Like the clicker still allows that clinical interaction where it removes you from the equation. It singles out what you actually need to do when you're developing marking behaviors with the dog.
Yeah. And I think as well, once the dog is healing or any sort of behavior that uses my body as a reference point, or if I'm luring, then I don't use a clicker at that point for a few reasons, but mostly I don't want to carry one. You know what I mean? Like once you're luring and you're holding a leash, now it's just another thing to be in your hand. It's probably somewhat unnecessary at that point. The gain isn't going to be massive having a clicker at that point. Whereas I think that the gain is quite large when you're just shaping and the dog's out there, that neutral tone, that, of course the dog's aware that you're making that and that they have to come back to you, but it certainly removes a lot of them looking to you for ways to solve the puzzle.
There is an argument against this where it could be said that that's a handler error, and it absolutely is what I'm about to say next, but it removes clicker hunting as well, which pre-cues the dog, which starts becoming part of the Pavlovian family. So you or I might not do that because we might be very subtle in the way that we're using it. But dogs are, especially a smart dog, a dog that's switched on and is watching the situation very carefully, you can interrupt the behavior if you start going clicker hunting, which I watched. I've watched students doing that for years. Even reaching for treat pouches, where it's anticipatory of doing the behavior. Those sort of things have a minor impact on everything. But as we've discussed in past episodes, or even just talking about training, you can talk about that 1 degree off at the beginning. You know, let's talk about snipering or just precision shooting. That 1 degree that you're off at the beginning is 30 degrees off at target. And that's the problem that you don't see if you don't start thinking about a few of those little bit of detail. Now, we're talking dog training. We're not talking about absolute smack-on bullseye precision every single time. We don't have to be ridiculous about this. But what we do need to do is try and eliminate as much error when we're trying to develop those little neurological pathways to begin with. We're trying to remove as much error as we possibly can. And you also want to make yourself more proficient in your delivery techniques as well, whether it be your marking or food delivery or whatever it might be. You want to be as proficient as you possibly can be, because if you start developing small variances and bad behaviors, your behavior mannerisms start to blow out a little bit, and therefore you start to see more problems coming in the dog's ultimate behavior. And what I find people doing is not blaming themselves because they're not aware that it's themselves that have caused this problem.
Yeah. Do you want to hear a sniper story?
I do want to hear a sniper story.
I think about this a little bit, right, from time to time. I'm reminded of it because of what you just said. And in the Army, we call it a subtension rule, right? And I think we've discussed this on the podcast before. So the military doesn't use degrees, or what the Australian military doesn't. I think the US still does a fair bit. They use DMS, degrees, minutes, seconds, because they're still imperial measurements. But the rest of the world uses metric. Even within the metric system, we use a different system that fits the metric system for compass points. In a normal compass, there's 360 degrees. The military uses milliradians, right? So there's 6,400 milliradians inside of a circle. And that means that each degree has about 17.4 or something like that milliradians within it. But the reason we use milliradians is that mil dot scopes have these like bubbles and measurements and all kinds of stuff inside of it that they're milrad sizes. And what happens with your subtension rule is that 1 mil, like 1 milliradian at 1 kilometer is 1 meter wide. Right. So you can measure things with your scope and all kinds of stuff really easily, right? So that's the idea of it, is that if you move your gun or whatever, your compass point, 1 mil, right, which is a tiny bit. There's 6,400 of them in a circle. When you travel a kilometer, the movement at a kilometer is going to be 1 meter, right? So it makes zeroing really easy and all that kind of stuff, and you can measure things with your scope. But I always think of this. This is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met, was this guy. I've known him since, I won't say his name because I believe he's still in the Army and he wouldn't like me talking about it anyway.
Yeah, that's fair.
I've known him since he was a digger in my first ever team that I was a 2IC of, right? So he was one of my earliest, like my very first little bit of power or of leadership, I should say, was that I was a team. So a commando team is 6 guys. I was the second in charge of one of those, and he was one of the 4 diggers in the team. And we deployed to East Timor together, and he's a super soldier. He's one of those incredible dudes. He's one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. Very unassuming. You wouldn't know what a terrifying human being he actually is. Anyway, he went on to and was with somebody else, because most snipers work in pairs, right? So usually when there's a sniper engagement, it's actually 2 people fire. They fire at the exact same time, so that most people, you're fairly unaware of that, but it's redundancy, right? Like they make sure that you're getting hit, and so 2 guys fire at the exact same time.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot. And so that even though sniper pairs have like a spotter and the shooter, then 2 sniper pairs will work together and create controlled fire. So he and one other guy hold the world record for the longest first shot confirmed kill. They shot a guy, it was over 2 kilometers. I can't remember the exact thing. It might have been 2,332 meters. I can't remember. Now, prior to that, there's a Canadian sniper that actually did it, like it was 3.4 kilometers, but it wasn't a first shot. He bracketed on.
Right.
And then he went to jail for war crimes because he took photos of the body. Like it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
But this guy has the longest first shot confirmed kill, 2,000. It was over 2 kilometers. And it got released publicly many years later. And when it came out, I was a sniper platoon sergeant and he was in the sniper platoon, right? And so we were looking on this forum of something, we're looking for some kind of ammo type or something. And then we found this whole forum about how it was bullshit, that there was no way, because it came out what kind of gun he was using. He used a Barrett 50 cal, but he only used a 12 power scope, right? Which is not a very powerful scope at all, but that's what was on it. That's what we got issued. A very, very high end Smith & Bender scope, like probably $6,000 worth of glass, but still only 12 power. Anyway, and I remember...
I was going to say, that seems incredibly underpowered.
Yeah, exactly. For that kind of thing. With a 50 cal gun, they only have 12 power. Anyway, so that caused a lot of brouhaha in the sniper forums.
Yep.
And the reason I bother going through all of this detail is it was we were having this conversation when I was a sniper platoon sergeant. So it might have been like 2013, something like that. It was a long time ago, right? And it was before the internet was as disgusting as it is today, right? But it was still pretty bad. And I remember sitting there reading it and it was saying that it was impossible, saying that this is absolute bullshit. They made it up. It either never happened or their reporting was bullshit. It didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. And I called out to him and I said, hey, the internet's calling you a liar. Come in here and defend yourself. And he looked up at me, deadpan, and goes, mate, I don't give a fuck what anybody on the internet has to say. And I kind of laughed and was like, no, they're saying that it's impossible. Like there's dudes with tables and graphs and all kinds of shit in this forum saying that it's impossible. What you did, come in here and defend yourself. And he goes, I was there, mate. I don't care. I don't have any interest in defending myself to an online forum about the things that I have done. He goes, I didn't release the information. I don't care who knows that that is the case. And I sure as fuck am not interested in getting into an argument with a bunch of losers online.
Yep.
And I remember thinking to myself, number one, you're a better person than me because I'm in here arguing with these people. I am presently contributing to this forum and saying, fuck you, right? Without identifying myself, but I am contributing. But I remember thinking at the time, oh, holy fuck, he really doesn't. He didn't even get up to come and have a look. He really didn't give a fuck. And I try and channel that energy as regularly as I possibly can into the dog space where I hold no world records for anything. But when you see people making a bunch of bullshit online to just be he didn't even bat an eyelid as to looking at it. He just was like, what do I care? What the fuck do I care?
That's an impressive trait.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah. Have you ever been involved in a conversation before where you were there and you knew all the facts and somebody's just rabbiting on a bunch of bullshit and you think, I was there. I was actually standing in the situation when that happened.
Mate, I watched another dude tell a story of what happened to me as though it is what happened to him. And he told the story in front of me and another guy who was also there.
Is it an army thing?
Yeah. And the other dude looked at me as we was halfway through and he's like, is this fucking for real? And I let him tell the whole story and was like, hey, I won't say his name either. I was like, you were there, yeah. But do you remember how that actually went down? It was fucking me that happened to. What the fuck?
I had that happen to me when we all had to work on the dock disputes. That was one of the most wild times in security that I've ever worked. It was just fucking out of control. There was a guy it was at a dog gathering many, many years ago. It was also years after that happened. And he was talking about it like he was absolutely there with his dog and he was part of the team. I cottoned onto this and I thought, you absolutely weren't there. I started drilling him and asking him questions. I said, what happened on this date and what happened when they were removing the executives and they took them into the tower and stuff like that, because I ran all those drills.
Yeah.
And I was there with Boyd and my mate Darren. Darren and I caught up in Queensland when I was up there the other day and we were talking all about this. And this guy was trying to manipulate this entire conversation. I said, dude, I was there. I was running those routines and so was my buddy Darren. And I said, you weren't there at all. I knew intimately who all the people were because I was in charge of having to, structure and do all the guidelines and everything and put all the procedures down. Well, Boyd was doing it ultimately, but I was one of the team leaders down there. And I said, you weren't there. And he goes, oh, no, I was at the other place. And I said, what other place? And he goes, oh, I was at the other dock. And I said, no, you weren't. And I
Yeah.
said, because we all came over on one boat together. And I said, because what we had to do, which was quite funny, well, what not quite funny, but we couldn't go in through the main gates, obviously, or we couldn't go in a known way. We had to be shipped in and put the dogs on our shoulder and climb up a wharf ladder and like climb onto the dock that way. It was the only way that we could safely get in and get out because we had to meet in different places all the time because it was so controversial at the time. I knew everybody. We were all gathering and we were doing like briefs and debriefs at the beginning of every session, at the end and the conclusion. I said, you were never there. I knew everybody who was there. They were all part of the same team. And I said, even the people who were going off into the other division, you weren't part of that group. But he carried it through. Like he totally believed. He goes, yeah, I was on the nights that you weren't there. And I said, no, you weren't. I was there through most of it. And I said, you weren't there, dude.
Do you think he was lying? Like he was lying the first few times he talked about that. Do you think he would pass a lie detector at that point?
Yeah, I do. You know that group that you were telling me about before, the Walter Mitty Society or whatever they are, and how they expose people who dress up as soldiers and tell war stories and so forth. But I think they're people with mental illness and they believe that.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
And some of them are just horrendous frauds. I think that was a situation that was going on. I think it was a degree of mental illness that the person had just, projected. I mean, there was a bunch of us telling stories about it, but it wasn't something that I look back on favorably or think, oh, that was awesome. It was horrible.
Yeah. There's a Malcolm Gladwell podcast called Revisionist History. We've spoken about it a couple of times. There's some really good episodes. There's some dog shit ones that are nonsense, but there's some really good ones. And one of them is, do you remember that? I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a CNN reporter, like a news anchor guy that talked about when his helicopter got shot down in Iraq and then they just hammered him. They're like, that never happened and it was stolen valor. And the pilot who flew the helicopter with him on it came out and was like, we didn't get shot down. Like that's not at all what happened. Malcolm Gladwell did this really good episode on how memory works and he used that as an example. And he found basically, if I'm remembering correctly, he found sort of every public telling that guy told of that story and watched it evolve over time. And the way, memory's super interesting in that, first of all, we don't know where the fuck your memories are, right? Like, isn't that one of the wildest things?
Absolutely.
Like, there isn't a place in your brain where your memories are. Like, we don't know where the fuck they are, right? That's such a bizarre thing.
Do you know also, I was reading something on neurology the other day and they were saying that when you remember something, that's the last memory of it that you have.
So this is exactly it. So what they showed was that he told the story and then what happens is in the telling of the story, you might embellish something because it makes for a better telling, or you might even omit a detail because the detail isn't appropriate for a person that's present when you're telling it. But that's how you'll remember it next time. And they follow, he shows like every public telling of this story. And it turns out what actually happened was he had the headset on in the helicopter. Another helicopter got shot down at the time, and it was possible that they were going to be redirected to go and help in the recovery, but then they didn't, and they just kept going. That's all recorded, because like all the radio communication is all recorded, right? So like they were able to access what really happened, but it showed his sort of telling of the story changing continually over time to the point where he told this story about how he was shot down, but it fit not the truth, but it fit his truth in his telling of like how he thinks of himself and his contribution to what happened there. And when he was confronted with the real story, he then was like, okay, I accept that because you've given me the evidence, but that's not how I remember. Like I misspoke. I genuinely have a memory of this happening. And I think sometimes like there's a few things that stories I've told a lot that I know they happened, the gist of it, like I know that the incident happened, but my memories are now not of it happening. They're of me telling the story of it happening. There's one particular thing that I've told the story many times. Like say, for example, like in my online course, and I've taught it plenty of times, like I tell this story about this dog, Rocky, right? Which it really happened. For sure, it really happened. And I'm still in touch with people who were there who can confirm that it really happened. But I don't actually have any memories of it. Like I only have the memory of me telling the stories because I've told the story at least 100 times, right? Yep. Because it's part of this teaching that I do. And so like I only have a memory of me telling the story. Similarly, I was involved in Afghanistan in a particularly life-changing event for myself, and I have no memory of it happening beyond me telling the story of it happening, to the point where I kind of don't talk about it anymore because I'm not even 100% sure that it happened, right? Like,
How bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. And so these kinds of things happen. Like people tell other people's stories and embellish their own stories and change their own stories. And that's because memory just doesn't work very well. It's not a hard drive. We don't know where the fuck it is in your brain. We don't know how the fuck it's pulled out and recalled. Like they don't understand that. And so it's malleable. It can change. And as your image of yourself changes as you get older, have more life experiences, you kind of tend to apply the memory of a past situation to your current self. So you imagine, if I'm thinking of the incident I'm talking about, I imagine me, when I tell the story and when I think about it now, it's 42 or 40, however the fuck old I am, 41-year-old me that's in that situation, knowing what I know now about the world, that's thinking he's in that situation in the past, where in reality, it was 20-something-year-old me with a very different worldview at the time, having those experiences. And so the decisions that I made then wouldn't be the same decisions I would make now. And so like it gets sort of incongruent with yourself because you're sort of trying to explain your actions but I'm not a person that would do that same thing now, right? Or maybe I am, I don't know. But like it's a very tricky sort of thing. And I think that the more that you talk about a specific incident, the further it gets from the truth of that incident. And, I think that eyewitness testimony is bullshit. Nobody really remembers anything with total accuracy. It's one of the Hermetic principles, like all truths are but half truths, right?
Have you seen the movie My Cousin Vinny?
A long time ago,
With Joe Pesci?
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
That's a brilliant movie where he's this shady little lawyer. Ralph Macchio's in it. It's Joe Pesci, Ralph Macchio, and Marissa Tomei, I think.
Marissa Tomei.
Yeah.
All I remember is that the final scene where she just turns the courtroom upside down. Like Marissa Tomei, like she gives testimony of like the tires. There's no way those tire tracks are from that car.
Correct. When she's the expert witness on the mechanics. But the incredible thing was that when people were called up to give testimony, how fraudulent their memory actually was. And he was able to provide evidence of those. Like he said, is this your window? Is this the trees in front of your house? How could you see the person in this, I think they call it the sack of spuds or something like that. How could you see this person with that dirty window, with this shitty, rusty old grill, with all those trees in the way, and the fact that you can't even see with your prescription glasses on? Like he was able to develop this whole structure and defense around the fact that their testimonies were absolutely bullshit. And some of them where people were just like thinking, well, that looks close enough to the reality of what I believed it was.
Yeah, for sure. And you just manufacture, like you have to make sense of a lot of shit in your mind. So your brain just fills in the details.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's really objectively provable when you do, like those optical illusions and stuff like that, where your brain, like it's, the shadow ones are the most obvious and easy, where it's got like, it looks like, is this square darker than this square? No, they're the same color. If you put them side by side, they go straight together. But your brain has inferred a shadow onto that one and made it darker. So you're just filling in the blanks. And I think that, we're a long way from dog training, but I think as well, your consciousness is only taking in the data of the senses that you have, and it just fills in the gaps. It doesn't like blank patches, right? Like it doesn't like going, well, I missed 30 seconds of information here. So it just makes up something to fit into there.
Which is why, I guess, when we, like when we carried this into the fabulous discussion that's just taken place, this is why it's so important that we get the facts straight when we're training dogs, because it can carry away into something completely misleading or inappropriate that you didn't want in your training program.
Totally. Good work. So you tied it back.
I did.
My answer to this, is there a piece of training advice or a tip that you thought was terrible for a while and then discovered it useful? Mine's actually bigger picture. For me, like I've had this weird journey of negative reinforcement. Like when I first started in dogs, I had this idea that I could be positive only. I tried to do that until I hit a limit pretty quickly and sort of had to broaden my horizons. Well, what it was when I actually started training dogs. So like...
Yeah, when you put it into a practical measure.
Yeah, well, it was theoretical.
That's what I keep saying to people when we've had these on and off discussions about this, and infamous people on YouTube are weighing in with their discussions. But the field test just doesn't.
Yeah, that's right.
This is where the argument falls apart. Like, you can argue realities on social media platforms till you're blue in the face. And people are. Like, it's clear that people are making a hell of a lot of money. I think that's the precursor to their motivation, is it's more about money and it is about the welfare concerns or the capability of results, when people are looking at what's actually measurable. For me, it's always proven in the field.
Yeah.
That's the only way
100%.
that's the only way you can win an argument is fuck your online compliance or whatever you want to talk about. When you're actually in the field with a dog and you can actually see whether it's measurable and marketable through the pragmatic stages of it, that's where you can see that this stuff really ties in.
And we see that happen, like there's been plenty of people throughout my time in dogs that I've had relationships with, had conversations with online, regularly and stuff like that.
It's good to talk things out. That's where it's nice, where you're having an inclusive conversation where parties can come together and you can theorize on things.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that because good strategies can be developed and then you can say, well let's go field try it.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's it. So I've had more than a few people in my life that I've had these conversations with and they've held a pretty strong position on, training and how it should be done. I've tried to sort of explain to people like, well, I appreciate your theoretical point of view. However, in my experience, that's not been the case. And then eventually they end up with same experience and find themselves thinking the same way. You know what I mean? Like, or a variant of it that they're like, oh, the book says this, but the real world application is another. And I think you see a lot of that from things like differential reinforcement and like a lot of the, fancier and often really cool strategies of quite good positive reinforcement trainers. They sort of explain like this works, and here's the scientific papers and evidence of it. I'm like, yeah, that's great. Show me on a real dog. You do it. Show me now. And it's a dog that lives in a home and it's a dog that walks down the street and it's a dog that has a life. It doesn't go straight into the kennel and only exist in a kennel or
generalize it. That's what we're asking for is a generalized approach.
Yeah. So show me that. And when they eventually do, most of them come around to being like, oh, okay. But anyway, I digress. So back to, for me, when I was trying to stay as positive as possible before I hit a limitation on that pretty quickly. But one of the things that I was kind of late to come around to was negative reinforcement. And it was because I didn't understand it. I've talked about this in the past, but when I wanted to learn it, because I was, really very much a popo nay trainer, right? Like I was like what most people are taught. Once I learned my positive reinforcement game was pretty good. I could teach a dog to do stuff. And also, unbeknownst to me at the time, I probably was using a hefty dose of negative reinforcement instead of punishment, and that's a different topic. But I could aversively get rid of behaviors I didn't want, right? Became pretty effective at that, like most balanced trainers. But what I wasn't really skilled at was being able to compel a dog to do something in the moment, right? When it's not what the dog wanted to do in the moment, being able to compel a dog to do it. And I know that's the role of negative reinforcement. And when I sort of came around to the idea of like, okay, that's the piece that's missing from my training and I want to learn how to do it, I got this DVD. It was on use of negative reinforcement, but it was gun dog stuff mostly, right? Which I've not done, but I just thought, well, these are the guys that, most gun dog stuff is sort of grounded in pretty strong use of negative reinforcement. So they're the ones I'm going to learn it from. And I watched the guy teach a hold with a tow hitch. And I watched him teach a dog go into its kennel, like in its box, on a pretty high level stim with the electrics. I could acknowledge that it worked, like for sure. And the dogs that he was doing it on were these like off tap, high drive labs with the, incredible pain tolerance and instant recovery, all of that. I could see that it worked and I could see that those dogs recovered, but I just was like, oh, that's not for me. I can't see myself doing that. And I don't have that kind of dog, I don't have a dog that I think would recover like that. And at the time with the kind of dogs I was working with, I was still in the army at this point. There was still plenty of like high powered dogs that would have, but the majority of my dog training at that point was the hobbyist stuff I was doing outside of work. And I was, developing a skill set. I was training tons and tons of dogs outside of my actual real job, just as a hobby to try and develop the skill set. And I just sort of thought, there's no fucking way the dogs that I'm training could handle that, right? And they couldn't. There's no fucking way. Most dogs, if you put a tow hitch on most fucking dogs and teach a force fetch with the tow hitch.
What's a tow hitch?
Tow hitch is like, it's a slip lead that basically goes around the dog's elbow and through its knuckles. And when you pull it, it lifts the dog's leg off of whatever it's standing on.
Oh, wow. I've never
and crushes their knuckles together. Okay. It's like old school, right? Like big time old school.
Well, there you go. I thought I'd seen everything and I haven't seen that.
I'll show you clips of it. For sure. Like I remember watching this DVD, sort of mortified watching it, thinking like, holy fuck, this guy recorded this. Yeah. like this is the thing that he's happy to show everybody.
Yep.
There's no denying that it worked. Like absolute, like within a few reps, a dog's holding that dowel.
Yep.
And within a few reps, a dog's diving into the kennel. And because of the style of dog he was teaching it on, they were fine. Like they totally recovered. It was not an issue. They learned the behavior and their attitude and everything remained pretty good within, a few moments after the thing. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I can see it. I know it works, but I'm not doing that. That's not for me. And it wasn't until I think that I really started working with Bart that I kind of got it. And I was like, oh, right. Okay, I see. And the style of negative reinforcement that I use now has really evolved and it's become a completely different thing. But for a long time, I thought of it purely as like, and of course the word is compulsion. That's what negative reinforcement is. But I kind of thought about it always as just being like forcing a dog to do something even when it doesn't want to do it, right? That's how I thought of it. And I think there's plenty of people that still think of it in that regard, right? Like, no, that's the negative reinforcement is the thing that gets it done even when the dog doesn't want to.
I have put some thought into that, and there's good conversations that both you and I have had in the past which have prompted me to think along this way. And I think the main problem is, which you highlighted before with your pre-thoughts on those field retrievers, is you often project the world through your experiences.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people online, when you look into what they're saying and how they're saying it, they're envisaging it through their thoughts of applying that principle of training through their dog. There's so many people who have little beta dogs that are just very compliant little dogs.
Yeah.
They fold at the drop of a hat's notice. That, the little dogs that will sit on your lap, travel in your handbag, and basically comply with everything that they should be doing through life. Wonderful. I'm not talking these dogs down, even though it may sound derogatory in what I'm saying. I'm not meaning it in a derogatory sense. What I'm saying is those dogs are then projected in the minds of people thinking, well, this is what the trainers want to do to our dogs. We're not talking about an application of training for their dogs. But the problem is you've got personalities now who are saying that's exactly what they want to do with your dogs.
Yeah.
And that's how they're establishing a network or building an army around their proposal, is saying this is exactly what these malevolent trainers want to do. They want to do this horrendous style of training to your dogs. And even the language that they're using, like saying it's a horrendous form of training. Whereas with some dogs who are more Viking-minded or more gladiator-minded in the way that they approach life, they need a specific technique or a tactic that will resonate with them and resolve a situation. Even though, there is long and arduous discussions around this, they're still seeing it from their own mind's eyes and their own very, very limited experiences. Yet that's the hill that they will die on over.
Yeah. I think as well, negative reinforcement is tricky to understand properly. And
it is.
If you're not willing to put in a good amount of fucking work
and field work it.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, it comes down to the pragmatic side of it. It's lovely to discuss it in theory, but it has to be taken out onto the field, and it has to be done across a multitude of different dogs and different breeds.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to know how their mind works and how they react to it. You have to see it for yourself. It's got to be a mind's eye capability.
But I think, so most people's opinion of negative reinforcement marries with what mine was. And that's that this is how you fucking force a dog to do something.
Yep.
And while that can be true, for sure, that can be true, it also can be, well, this is how you provide the dog certainty about what the behavior is, because negative reinforcement into the behavior and positive reinforcement out of the behavior creates a space within what the behavior is that gives ultimate clarity to the dog. And negative reinforcement doesn't need to be like wildly aversive. Now, we should never hide from the word, like it does have to be at the minimum annoying. The dog has to want it to stop,
does. Yeah, of
right?
course.
Like it doesn't, we're not helicoptering the dog. We're not putting the tow hitch on the dog, right? Like,
This could be psychologically as well.
Yeah.
That's one of the core principles around this.
yeah. So it took me longer than I care to admit to really truly understand how to use negative reinforcement for that ability to create clarity for a dog, where you can go to a dog like, hey, positive reinforcement told you, like if I'm good with my markers, I'm good with my positive reinforcement, I can say to the dog like, right now you're correct and you no longer need to be doing that behavior. But that doesn't tell the dog how long you were correct prior to that. But using negative reinforcement then tells the dog like, here you go, you're not in the behavior. Okay, it turned off. You are in the behavior. Be in that position. You can give some duration in the behavior and then you can mark and come out of the behavior, and it will never be clearer to a dog like, oh, that's exactly what we want. I got it. That's how I do it. So it can provide that level of clarity and understanding. But then I think another thing that took me even longer to fully understand was how motivational and fun it can be to the dog.
I think the mix-up for a lot of people is escape avoidance versus negative reinforcement.
Yeah, well, it's not like neither of those are great terms, right? Like escape and avoidance training. Holy fuck, Skinner. Thanks, jerk, right? And negative reinforcement, like same deal. Like they're not great terms, but I think,
but it's just a term nonetheless. As we in last week's conversation where we talked about deprivation. The well is being poisoned no matter what. You could have a fluffy word that could mean the same thing. After a period of time, somebody will say, well, I don't like that word either.
Yeah.
What we do is we keep changing the goalpost on language that's being used because people don't like it.
Yeah.
They band it together and think, well, I don't like this. I don't like what it stands for. It's a representation. It's a word used to represent a principle. But then people have fallen out of love with the principle. So what we then do is we've got to use disguise words or layer in a new word around it until that trick is no longer, like the transparency comes through and then people go, oh, I've just been tricked.
Yeah.
You've just used another term in front of a term that I didn't like before. Now I don't like that term.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing that definitely for me was, I thought was terrible. I'm sure that if you search the internet, you'd find back in the day where it was different forums, there's probably me talking about that. I never got on my high horse and said that people who do it are pieces of shit, but I definitely can remember actually having a conversation with a lady a long time ago online and being like, yeah, that's not something I can ever see myself doing. And here we are. Right. But I think
we've discovered that we're allowed to change our mind based on better information.
Yeah, for sure. That's right. So that to me, it took me so long to fully understand negative reinforcement. And the more that I play with it, the more I understand now as well. And you sort of the way that it can be so appetitive. Like I always thought of negative reinforcement as like, you just got to compel the dog to do it. And I was like, well, that's not my style. But you can play these games with it and you can get so much more buy-in with it. And you can give the dog clarity and certainty. And with some dogs, especially some of those really anxious dogs, like the presence of positive reinforcers can cause them issues, like, and this is one of the things that often we see with the dogs that are overdone in the positive reinforcement side of things. They can have no clarity or certainty about any of the things that they're meant to be doing because they're constantly just taking in things that they're not able to even pay attention to what they're doing to see it as reinforcement. They're just getting, right, all the time. So those kind of dogs sometimes do way better under negative reinforcement, So like, I think that's the thing. It took me a long time to get, but I'm really happy that I do now because it really truly, having a strong understanding of that has allowed me to, to become even more of a truly balanced trainer where like because that's what I'm looking for is proper balance where I want the dog to be perfectly nice and level. And balanced training allows for that because that might mean in some instances when the tilt is all the way one way, I go, okay, well, there's nothing but positive reinforcement going into this dog because that's what's going to bring us back to balance. And then there's other times where I go, oh, no, it's a healthy dose of both. We're going to mix it all in. And then there's other times where we go, hey, no, we're just confusing and making this dog hysterical using positive reinforcement. And this is negative reinforcement for this session or for this exercise or whatever it is. So like that's why I think it's so important, really, truly understanding it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And to go back to what we were talking about before as well, I feel that observation through field work is really where it's at.
Yeah, 100%. Show us what you got.
Well, mate, there's so many times where I've seen arguments unfolding and it's all theoretical until I see dogs out in the field. And there's a lot of times where people just they won't show up. They won't come out to the actual field day because that's where the proof is in the pudding. And that's the disappointing side of it. But even, when you're talking about the presentation of stress involved in training, when you listen to people like Sapolsky or even Dr. Melanie Uda, who's been doing quite a lot more activity on social media lately, where they talk about healthy doses of stress and why it is so important in the function of the nervous system and even the understanding of new behaviors. I just don't understand why people are trying to create this stress-free world when it's such an important and an integral part to learning overall. But that really highlights people's misinterpretation and lack of understanding of why it is important for controlled measures of stress to be introduced.
I have a theory on that, and I think it's because most of the stress that humans are exposed to these days is chronic stress.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So they don't, like all stress is seen as chronic stress because that's the stress that we're typically under. Like social media is a huge one, right? Like there's no escaping it.
Mate, the bullies follow you into your bedroom.
Yeah. So it used to be if you had some issue with someone, you're like, oh, well, fuck, I just stop dealing with those dickheads and I don't have to worry about it, right? But like you can't do that now in an online space.
Well, you and I were lucky to have childhoods where that wouldn't follow you around. It just wouldn't follow you into your lounge room and into your bedroom or, it was done for the day. If there was a problem at school, it was at school.
Yeah.
It didn't come home. You didn't think about it when you were at home because you were busy out playing cricket or, doing sports or something like that. You were preoccupied. You were doing things. These days, people are constantly on their phone. I think even in Australia, they just introduced a law that bosses aren't allowed to contact you after work because of the amount of stress that people are under, where inconsiderate bosses are texting them after 5 p.m. and saying, hey, get this done, or I just need this, or please call me, or blah, blah, blah. Now it's actually a workplace law where if they do that, they're liable.
Yeah. We had a funny conversation the other day at home, like, can you believe it? So Rip is 9 and kids in his class. Now, mind you, he's in a composite class, right? So there's year 3 and year 4 kids. And I think that the kids that this applies to are girls and they're the year 4 ones. So they're a bit older than him and they're maybe a bit more mature.
Yep.
But they got phones and social media.
Right.
And he's like hitting me up. I was like, not a fucking chance, mate. Like, no way. You're not getting a phone. He's got an Apple Watch, right? Like my old broken screen one. He's got that can call me and I can call him. And when he goes to a friend's place or he goes out somewhere, he has that, right?
Yep.
Like that's it. That's all you need. You don't need anything more than that. That prompted the whole conversation of like what the world used to be like. And I was telling him, when I used to call your mum, right, I had to speak to whoever the fuck answered the phone.
That's right.
I had to be like, call the landline and whoever the fuck answered, I had to talk to him.
Exactly.
And be like, hello, can I please speak to Jane? It's a whole
different generation.
Yeah. And that's just one example of he struggles with commercials. Like every time he has to watch an ad, he drops his fill. Like, what is this? This is fucking nonsense. I was like, yeah, mate, welcome to our world.
Yep.
Anyway, hey, the next question is an interesting one. It's Doug Smith and it says, what about the opposite? So Brad asks, is there a piece of training advice or tip that you thought was terrible for a while and then discovered a use for? You say the clicker, I say negative reinforcement. Then Doug says, what about the opposite? Something that you thought was awesome and now you think's dog shit.
Oh, I think I'd have to think on that one.
Yeah. I definitely became a shaping zealot.
Yep.
And got way too into it. Now, the problem with shaping, as I'm reminded at the moment because I'm making a bunch of content about it, is it's so much fun to do. And when you get a dog that's into it, you can go way too long. You can teach so many different things. And it as a trainer and for the dog, it can be super fun. But I think that what I definitely have done too much of it with dogs in the past, definitely taught behaviors, shaping that I wouldn't do it in that fashion again because I just think that it carries, it carries some cons. Like there's a lot of good pros that come for it but there's a lot of cons. And, now everything to me is really understanding all of that, right? Like my whole shtick at the moment is trying to teach people like, hey, no matter how you intend to train your dog, know as much about it as possible so that you can train with true intention. And if you have decided like, no, I'm a person that never used tools, will be a person that never used tools knowing the pros and cons of using a tool, right? Yeah. And make a conscious choice not to be one of those rather than just an ignorant choice of being that. If you have the data and you make that choice, like, cool, good for you. But I think shaping is one of those ones where I could see some of the cons, but I thought that the pros outweighed all of the cons. And I think there's certain times when they do, but there's times when they don't. And so for sure, like Remy was totally free shaped, and I'll never, ever, ever do that again. Like never, ever, ever. There's plenty of shaping that I still do with young dogs, and there's reasons for it. And there's things that I teach that I think are better taught shaped than lured or anything else. But I definitely was way too hard of a shaping zealot for a long while there.
I just found my thing.
What is it?
Alpha rolling.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We used to be big into alpha rolling through the old days, but I wouldn't do it anymore. Yeah, I don't agree with it
You
anymore.
wouldn't do it ever?
I'm not saying I wouldn't do it ever. It would have to be viable for me to want to do it. But I don't think I need to do it. I've progressed as a better trainer where I don't need to do that. I can manage the dog perfectly well through training tools and a leash without having to alpha roll dogs and so forth. But we used to do it abundantly, and now I just don't think that it's...
What would be like in the past? Because I've never, to my knowledge, I've gotten into fights with some dogs, like especially some powerful dogs that come back the line, because that's what they've come to me to help with.
And that's usually where it would come from. Like if the dog came up the line at you and so forth, that I agree that there's times where you're going to have a fight with the dogs. The problem isn't with me, it's with the owner of the dog. Usually won't do it properly.
Yeah.
And they'll completely fuck it up and they'll mismanage their relationship with the dog over it.
Yeah. So the only time I've ever, I would probably say that I've never like alpha rolled a dog, but I've been in a fight with a dog and found myself in a position like hanging on to the dog's collar so that it can't bite me and restraining the dog in a way until it calmed down before I was like, hey, we're not fighting, me and you. Like, you have to calm down before
when you're
I can
working with
let you go.
powerful dogs, that's unavoidable.
Yeah, that like to anybody that's listening going, oh, you're a monster. Well, fuck you. You've never handled the kind of dogs that I've handled. If you've never done that, you've never handled a proper dog.
That's right. That's the limitations of their understanding based on they're projecting through their own soft dog when they're thinking about that. It's like being in the forest with a bear and then realizing, holy shit, this thing is going to fucking come down and eat me. And then you have to take affirmative action to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Some of these dogs are incredibly willful and incredibly dangerous. And there are situations that you need to step up to. I'm not talking about kicking the living shit out of the dog or anything deplorable like that, but you have to manage those situations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's not just keeping yourself safe, it's also keeping the dog safe from itself.
Yeah. So like I wouldn't say that I've alpha rolled dogs. I've had plenty of struggle cuddles with dogs.
Struggle cuddles.
Where it's been like, hey, I'm not getting bitten. I'm not fighting back, but I'm not letting this happen.
Cuddle.
Right?
I think you've just invented my favorite new word.
Oh, that's an old one. That's that's a jiu-jitsu.
I've never heard that before.
That's a jiu-jitsu saying from way back.
Struggle cuddle.
Yeah. We've got a whole, in the puppy course that me and Jazz are putting together, there's a whole struggle cuddle session on how to like show a dog like, no, you're going upside down. I'm cutting your nails.
Yep.
Like, and you're not, it's happening, right?
Yep.
Like you're totally safe. I'm going to demonstrate that to you. But if you fight back, like it's not going to work, right? Like this is how it's going down, which I think is a super important thing for the type of dog that's going to, if that dog's going to grow up and become the kind of dog that don't like being moved around and, like that kind of stuff, like those kind of dogs need their, it's a bigger conversation, and it's what we spoke about last time we did have Mike Ellis on, was talking about that like cooperative care. So you see a lot of people putting all this work into positive only cooperative care for nail trims and all that kind of stuff. And that's all cool until the dog doesn't want to do it, right? And then that shit falls apart real quick. And so the way that we teach that stuff is there's an element of positive reinforcement involved in it for sure, but mostly it's that gentle compliance. Like, hey, this is going to happen. Like you're an 8-week-old puppy, you're in my arms, I'm going to hold you in a way that might cause you to squirm a little bit. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, we call that relaxed compliance.
Yeah. So like you're going to relax and then I'm going to as well, right?
Yep.
And you're going to learn that I'm totally safe.
That I totally believe in.
Yeah.
That I'm a sworn advocate for relaxed compliance.
Yeah.
Call it struggle cuddle or whatever it is. I think it's just an exchange on words.
Yeah.
But we've always called it relaxed compliance. And let's just agree same but different because it primarily is.
And is one of the most important things you can teach a dog.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because that's what's going to allow it to have the emergency medical procedures it's going to need when it's older, right?
Yep.
Like that's the thing.
Hey, wait. So you don't agree with consent?
We've been through that. Like that's one of the things.
I know.
One of the language that I use quite a lot, because I do believe in consent, but I also believe in informed consent, right?
Or capable consent.
Yeah. And so there's plenty of things where I often say to people, invite the dog back to you, right? So like stuff like that, when you're playing with a dog, I'd say invite the dog, which is saying to the dog like, hey, I'm ready to go again. Do you want to go? Like that's the same kind of thing. We're looking for, I want you to want to be a participant in this. But there's plenty of other times where I'm like, no, you don't have a fucking say. Like you can't fathom how important this is, you know?
Have you seen those videos where people go to a hairdresser and the hairdresser says, hey, do you mind if I touch you? And the person goes, oh yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Like, why did you go to the hairdresser?
Yeah. It's stupidity. This is the people that are driving us into the sun. What do you think's going to fucking happen when you go to the hairdresser? They're not
Well,
gonna be able to touch you.
that's my point. You know, like it's different if you're.
What happens if they say no? Do they get up and leave? Like, why did we go through all this?
It's bizarre. Well, for me, it's bizarre. It might not be bizarre to the up-and-coming generation of kids that are coming up today, but to me, it's totally bizarre that you go to a place where that's what's going to happen is you're going to get your hair cut. Like, it's a different story if you're out dating and, you know, somebody wants to hug you or kiss you or something like that and they say, hey, can we
that's
kiss
a
or
different
something
thing.
like that? You'd say,
sit in the barber chair.
That's something where I would expect consent to be given. But coming to a barbecue, oh, yeah, it's bizarre.
So I go to this barber. I really enjoy the process of being in there because my barber Mo, I think he came to Australia when I think he was 11. He's an Iraqi refugee, right? And is one of the funniest fucking dudes ever. And he just slays everyone, like just teases everybody in the fucking place.
Yep.
And all the guys in there bounce in and out of English and Arabic. And like my Arabic these days, like I can barely understand anything they say. I used to have a decent idea of what they were saying. I can't really speak it, but I could kind of get the gist. Now I'm pretty bad.
Yeah.
And they tease me so much. And every time he does my beard, he makes a joke about slitting my fucking throat. Like every fucking time. And I like back there, I'm like, oh, you motherfucker. That's all I can think about now. Hey, back to our topic.
Yes.
Thing that you thought was an okay training technique, alpha rolling, and now you wouldn't do. When that was a thing, and I presume we're talking like 35 years ago.
Yep.
What were some of the triggers for that? Because I tell you, I heard from someone that there was a trainer who pretty recently, their suggestion for the dog pulling on the lead was alpha rolling it. And I was like, what the fuck? They're like, yeah, they have to understand their position in the pack. And I was like, oh, I didn't believe that anybody was still prescribed to that.
Yeah, it wasn't for anything minimal like that. It was generally for showing attitude towards their owner or where we felt the dog was getting out of control and needed to be put in its place.
Right.
But I'm super, super reluctant to do it. Like as I said before, this is not a play on words, but relaxed compliance, like teaching young dogs and even puppies that being picked up and squirming and carrying on like a pork chop, some of that behavior is unacceptable. And they have to learn, like, if I'm picking you up, I'm picking you up for a reason. We're not going through this whole bullshit consent thing. Like, I'm picking you up, you're going to be transported, and that's how the world works.
Yeah.
And the pup carries on a little bit, and you just say, hey, settle down. It's not
like,
not
that's
working.
how you develop trust.
That's right. That's how you develop. That's true negative reinforcement. That's
Yeah.
a perfect use of negative reinforcement to teach them, I know this feels a bit weird, but nothing's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And in fact, the other side of this is going to be great.
Well,
So
and that's what trust is. This is what I think people...
they're getting social media misled.
Yeah, but I mean, trust is a weird thing because like until someone is in a position to fuck you and doesn't, you have no reason to trust them.
That's a good point.
Right?
That's a good point.
That's one of the things. And so people go like, oh, I trust this person. But if that person has never been able to cause you a problem or been in a position to do it, then you have no reason to trust that person because that trust hasn't been tested.
Yep.
And so I think that's one of the things when we talk about that cooperative care kind of stuff, like, yeah, like you're teaching cool monkey drills, right? Like you're teaching tricks, but you're not developing trust because trust is when I am vulnerable and you don't take advantage of my vulnerability. Then I go, oh, I trust you because we were in the situation and you didn't fuck me over. And I think that's one of the things that you only get a window in time to do that with a puppy, right? Like you get that window where you go like, no, I'm your person. I care about you more than anything in the world, but I know things you don't. I've got to move you in places and in ways that you're not going to enjoy, but I will protect you. I will make sure nothing goes wrong for you.
And what the fuck does a puppy know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like kids. What the fuck do kids know?
Exactly.
You know, they don't know anything until they learn what the parameters of the world is.
Yeah. So then they learn pretty quick. They're like, oh, right, no, like you
This worked out for me.
Yeah.
This worked out great.
All right. Should we move on?
We'll wrap it up for that one.
Oh, that's it.
We're at an hour 10.
Oh, wow. Look at us.
I know.
We're smashing through them. All right. Well, hey, that's it for another episode. Canon Paradigm. As always, if you like what you hear, just like, rate, share, subscribe. Do that through whatever subscription service you download us from. If you want to support the show, best way to do that is to jump into Patreon. A few bucks a month gets you a giant backlog of information in there, as well as new stuff going forward.
Definitely do that.
Yeah.
Tip it into our funnel. Not old mate.
Who's old mate?
Our old mate on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Fuck him.
Yep.
You're asking money, not him. You can get cool shirts and stuff too. Go in the spring. There'll be links in the show notes. That's how you can find that.
Yep. And a tapestry.
Get a giant tapestry for sure. If you want to get in touch with us, best way to do that is to jump into the Facebook discussion group. There's a lot of cool information happening in there. And these episodes we're doing of late where we're sourcing all this information is coming from there directly. But if you needed to, you could shoot us an email. We are info@thecanineparadigm.com. Love you all. Goodbye.